Morning everyone and welcome to this integration joint board meeting Tuesday 17th of December. Can I please remind all members that meetings are recorded and will be made available to public view on the DGHSCP webpage, and this recording will publish within 24 hours. Members are asked that if they'd like to ask a question or be included in the conversation of the meeting, they must raise their hand. All members are asked to join in person. No one has notified that they will be attending virtually today. Can I remind all members who are submitting their apologies for any meeting, including the committees of the IJB, please ensure that they advise the chair of the meeting and the business support team of who will be substituting for them at the meeting and ensure that they receive all the necessary paperwork ahead of that meeting. Can I please remind all report authors to assume that everyone has read the reports prior to this meeting and they're not required to provide detailed update in the meeting. Firstly, do we have any apologies?
We've got one from Stephen Morgan today that Rebecca Aldridge is here as a substitute.
Okay. No more? Okay. Do we have?
Sorry, Vicky's.
Sorry.
Callum McCall tells me he's put apologies in.
All right, not had any fun with it. That's fine. I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask members if we have any declarations of interest in relation to our agenda today? Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 3. We have 2 sets of minutes that require approving today. We have the meeting of the 24th of September, which took place in Annan. We have the meeting of the 29th of October, which took place at DGRI. Minutes have been circulated. I've been through them. I'm happy with the accuracy, but I'm putting it out to members to see if there are any points of accuracy that need amending. Okay, that was quite a significant meeting whereby we addressed the issue of the maternity services at Woodtonshire. If everyone's okay with that, we'll have them marked as approved. Okay, thank you. And on the 29th of October, the meeting at Doncaster General Infirmary, where we discussed the matters of right care, right place. We made decisions in relation to the utilisation of the 4 cottage hospitals. Again, I've been through them. I'm really happy with them. Is any other points of accuracy from anyone? Okay, mark them as approved, please. Okay. Next on the agenda is the action list. Amber, can you update us where we are with that, please?
Yep, so there was 2 noted from September. One of them was within the membership update, which was for Linda to become the chair of the vice chair, sorry, of the IGB Strategic Planning and Commission. That's been agreed, and we've had a committee in the meantime. Then there was another one regarding, it was within Katie's financial update in terms of communication, etc. to the public. That's all been issued, and I think there's some issued out yesterday, so they'll both be marked as complete.
Okay, thank you for that.
And then the right care, right place ones, it was just all the communication was issued, just following that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Kirsty?
Chair, can I just make a plea? We have sent round the social care visioning direction that I've only had 2 comments back from non-voting members, so from advisory members. So just to make a plea, we'll reissue that just to get your approval so we can issue that to the local authority.
Okay, can I ask if we do that today, if we could get back to Kirsty by the end of the week? Thanks, just get that progressed. Thank you.
I have another action update, and that's about the carer recruitment process. I've been linking in with Claudine Brindle in the carer centre. I have now got a kind of final draft ready, and I'm just getting their view on that so we can get Rod to support us in terms of some platforms that we can actually go out to get a carer rep around this table. Thank you.
I think that's quite important. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 5, the committee updates from chairs. Audit, Risk and Governance, and I understand that their meeting was cancelled since the last IJB, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you understand why that was?
Come on,
just that there was no business to take to that meeting. We quite often over the last few years have only had 3 meetings a year rather than 4. So I think we've got the next one scheduled for February time.
We have.
So we'll undertake this instead of that written time, and that was agreed with the chair.
Do we need to perhaps review that then and schedule them for 3 times a year?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. Item 5B is the finance performance and quality meeting on the 8th of October. That's already been circulated, and at that meeting we discussed approval and sign off of previous minutes. The delegated budget update, which was provided by Katie in relation to brokerage and such like. We had a directions update from Kirsty, and we had an overview of the contracts monitoring, which was provided by Peggy Taylor. And then we were talking about needs for representation from social services. Part of what we were discussing there, obviously we've got the finance with Katie, we've got performance in relation to the monitoring, but we seem to be short in what we can bring to the table in relation to quality assurance and quality checking, and that's for why we need someone from social services. I can't remember if we done an action on that to engage someone.
I'll have to check the committee's action
Okay.
log. Andy, sorry, I can't, not got great access here today, so I can
Right, no
feed back.
problem. But if we could do that, and if we
Yeah.
could get it included in the minutes, that'd
Yeah.
be super. The minutes from the meeting on the 9th of July are attached, and therefore, if anyone has any questions, so put that out for anyone. Comments or questions? Kirsty?
Probably just in addition to that, the directions paper does include what we discussed on the closure of 7 directions from that meeting that I'll give a general overview of shortly.
And really just to remind people that that is the intended process, is that we have the meetings, we make decisions based at the committee meetings, they then come for here for either approval
Indeed.
or returning back to the committee. So that's okay. Item 5C is the strategic plan and delivery commissioning, and we've got Greg with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Quite a lot of discussion at this meeting, a really useful meeting. So everyone's got the paper with the detail. And I would just like to draw attention to 3 specific items that we discussed. We had a discussion, if you look at 3.4, around proposed priorities arising from the review of the annual performance review report. So that was a really useful discussion, touched on a number of things like potential for new directions, prioritisation, and a need to align directions. What was the outcome of that was that would be taken into a full IGB workshop, which is planned for January. The second thing I would like to draw your attention to is that we discussed the final draft of the carer strategy. So we've seen this as it's been developed, and we had a discussion on the final draft, as I said. So we, as a committee, were content following that questioning. So we are recommending that that's taken forward, but there's an item on today's agenda to discuss that in detail. But it's just noting that has been discussed at the committee. The final thing, bringing to you, if you look at the paper, that's Appendix 1, which is around the potential to set a direction for supported accommodation opportunity at the Garrick site. So this was discussed at the previous IGB, but the chair had asked for a bit more detail on what that was to be brought back. So that's been brought back in full today. So you have that paper again. The committee has discussed this, and we as a committee that we would like to recommend that a direction is taken forward. So that's for consideration at today's IGB. At the conclusions, I think highlighted very well, there is a lack of specialist supported accommodation, and that's resulting in people being accommodating out of region and in settings that are not appropriate. And that includes older people and people with complex physical disabilities. So this is an opportunity to rectify some of that. So the paper discusses implications, etc. But again, the committee discussed this, and we feel we would like to recommend that this is taken forward. To open it up, if any of the officers who attend the committee would like to add anything more on that before it's discussed.
No. Okay, so Can we have a look at, has everyone got sight of the paper? Appendix 1. Okay, everybody got sight of it. Seems to me that it could be an investment to save. Talking about £30,000 a year. It is per year, isn't it? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, has nobody got any thoughts or comments on this? I mean, we did have it at the previous meeting, and the idea was it was come back for us to make a decision on it. If nobody's got any questions, it would appear to me that what we're doing is we're agreeing that this is the way forward. There was no dissenting voices, then thank you for that work, Craig. And thank you for bringing it back, and can we get that recorded, Amber? Okay, thank you.
And Andy,
Sorry,
is it possible just ask a question about some of the other?
that's what I was up there.
Oh, that's
Okay.
okay, that's fine, that's good. Great, sorry. Yeah, it was just a really kind of welcome conversation that was had about kind of strategic directions and kind of areas that could be looked at in terms of strategic directions. And I know I think we're going to explore it maybe a wee bit more at the workshop, because I think some of it is a wee bit kind of complex. Like the new physical activity strategy is not being formally ratified. I think it's going through community planning structures. The local child poverty action plan is going through the NHS board, and there is a screening and equalities plan already that the board has. So I guess it's how you kind of work through the governance to get some of these to a committee, because these are complex things, and the IJB doesn't have the delegated authority to direct across all of these areas. So there's only certain areas that we've planned that the IJB would be able to delegate kind of against. So I think it's kind of, I don't know if I'm just trying to work out the expectations of that workshop, because I think what might come as a process of what maybe needs to be followed to do them, to get them. But I think there could be some things that could be brought forward in relation to that. But it's just about how we work through that. So.
I'll come in on that,
Okay.
Chair. So, yes, so I think the discussion was had because we have got some gaps in terms of our strategic commissioning intentions, and especially around that early intervention and prevention. And then you're talking about the physical activity strategy, etc. So it's about, the workshop's about filling those gaps, so to speak, so we've got a better balance across those strategic intentions. And secondly, with the directions that we currently have at this moment, they're very specific or very general. Now, what guidance says from Scottish Government, as Nicole and I have made links with Scottish Government Paul Leak, and we should have, for functions, most functions that are delegated, a direction, an associated budget with that, and an actual how we're going to monitor and manage performance of those functions. So that is going to be quite a significant piece of work on the 14th of January that we've got that scheduled for. So, and it'll really show where we're at and where we need to get to.
Good thing. I was just going to invite you in, David. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us how it links into Right Correct, please.
No. So absolutely 100% agree with just and recognise, Valerie, that something like deliver the physical activity strategy is beyond the bounds of the IJB. But I think what's important is that when we do issue directions for those delegated functions, that we perhaps include as well how we expect to see those delegated functions contribute to that. So the conversation in the workshop, I think, has to be about how we set our schedule to make sure that we are issuing directions that support all of this wider work. And as Kirsty says, brings much better balance to how we are delivering against our strategic commissioning directions as well. So it might not be a direction to deliver it, it might be a direction that says, as we are looking to commission public sector DHE to do X, Y, and Z, we'd expect to see the physical activity strategy reflected in the services that we commission through it. It's probably a poor example, Alan, but that's the kind of process that we have to follow. We need to think rigorously each time we issue a direction to what extent is it actually delivering against these areas that we've got gaps in.
And I do think that the evolution of our directions is headed in the right direction.
Indeed.
If you'll excuse the
Yeah.
double bit, because we have had them that have been very vague and imprecise, and I think that we're actually focusing and we're just having a conversation before we get started in the meeting about how we need to identify what outcome we're trying to achieve right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then we have to phrase our direction to the appropriate body in the appropriate way to make sure that we get the inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes that we're looking for. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
And I think that's really, really welcome, and I suppose it's just it's a different way of thinking, because like, so the NHS board have responsibility with council for a child poverty annual report, and so there are some actions in that are specific for health and social care. It's not something that's ever come through to the IGB to get a direction to do for them, because it happens, if you see what I mean, and it's how you get that.
And it's how we consider it as part of, yeah.
Katie?
Andy, the only other reflection I had, particularly looking at the list that's there, is some of them will tie into the conversation that we had in the in-committee session in terms of,
Yes.
there's a little bit of chicken and egg around that, because obviously we can't give a direction on elective healthcare if that's not a delegated function.
No, I did pick up on that. There's a strong correlation between what we've just been talking about and what's actually presented in the paper.
But how we support people to wait well, which is what that is about.
Yeah.
The answer to that probably does sit within community health, social care and health sector services. So it's about us thinking very differently, I think, around what it is we're trying to achieve and how we issue directions that went on.
Well, I think with financial challenges, we need to be thinking differently anyway. We need to be thinking of creative ways of how we deliver that care within the communities and balance the demand against what is available. Okay, thanks. Thank you for that. Thanks, Greg. Item 5D is the Transformation, Innovation and Futures Committee. I think we've got a couple of updates, have we? Ian?
Yeah, I'll go through this next card and feel the business obviously have to hand back to yourself at some point. This one today is to note the update to the Innovation Joint Focus as right. I'll point out a couple of things. Consider the proposed direction for maintenance of the feature of the Galloway Female Hospital is a key part of local healthcare estate, and subject to that agreement or arrangement, issued the direction to NHS Dumfries and Galloway. So I'll probably pass that back to yourself when we get to that point. So it's as right the report itself, what we discussed. I'm just reflecting on the discussion we had this morning at 3.5, it's assessment of effectiveness innovation and how that actually, our findings of that, I mean, how that feeds into what we discussed this morning. People that might reflect the feedback and help. That this is consistent with the findings from Audit Scotland's report that integration is not viewed as being as mature as it could be. And I think that was an ideal opportunity, whereas through the review of what we've talked about this morning, and we're talking about having a further workshop there to discuss it wider, which feeds into the commissioning plans. But that was the main points, but this a bit that really interested me as well beyond that was the target operating model. David's doing a piece of work in regards to the National Task and Finish Group, Remote Rural and Island Services. And that seems very interesting, but we couldn't get to actually define that. So again, we're looking to see exactly what does that operating model look like. And that's got to be a topic of conversation going forward. The lens, that was bringing that to an end, the lens programme. But we'll look at it because it's as right, like I say, it's kind of like that detail. I think the detail we're in particular is 2.1. Decisions we'll make there. I'll hand it back to you, Chairman, if that's okay. I'll take any questions and just on record again, as usual, the help and support I get from David Custody and Anna in particular is very much appreciated.
Okay, thanks for that, Ian. Any questions on the paper presented? Well, we have a direction in there. I'm assuming, Kirsty, you've pulled that together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we happy to authorise that and issue that direction? Yeah. No dissenting voices? Okay. Make a note of that. Thank you. Okay, moving on then. Item 6 is IGB direction progress, and Kirsty's going to take us through this. Thanks.
Yeah, so essentially this is Chair follow-up from the Finance Performance and Quality Committee in terms of considering the recommendation for closure of 7 directions which are within the paper. I have included some of the directions that I've issued in terms of new directions that have been agreed over the past couple of meetings, and I've also got just a very general update in there. And to note, the general update will become a much more detailed update in terms of delivery status and anticipated outcome status, if we can do that, dependent on the general wording of directions. So that will come into the committee that we've got scheduled in January the 7th, I think, Finance, Quality and Performance. So more detail will come on that, Chair. So essentially this is just to approve the closure of the regional planning directions, because we are part of the West of Scotland, the NHS board network, which does explore and foster the closer working and collaboration, and it probably does link into a bit of that NHS reform that David alluded to earlier on. And we have already got regional planning arrangements in place in terms of oral maps, VACs, Golden Jubilee, vascular general surgery, and we've got other areas identified, such as sleep studies, endoscopy, lab services and transport for future arrangements. So I'll just pause at that one.
Shall we go through them one at a time and then just
Yes.
leave it open, make sure that there's any comments that people
Yeah.
have the opportunity to do that, but certainly I had no concerns in relation to that, so anyone else? Okay,
Good. The drug and alcohol strategy is for closure as well. That was way back in 2020 that was put out. There was a report way back in 2021 that actually closed off that direction. So we've gone through the detail of that in said committee. So essentially that's just again for closure, because we've had the evidence to highlight that we've done that.
any issues, anyone? Comments? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next one is, this was the National Flexible Framework. This has actually been superseded by the most recent National Flexible Framework that we approved that additional £1.6 million for. So essentially that's closed down because we've got a new direction out to local authority.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. No. Okay.
Okay, the next one is the orthopaedic pathways. This was way back in 2021, and this was essentially to redesign orthopaedic pathways to kind of maximise opportunities and promote that self-management, and also develop those primary care based pathways, offer direct referrals to X-ray, and embed vetting of new referrals to ensure those who need it can be seen. We've agreed to close that direction as that's complete, because this has moved into a business as usual with regular performance reporting arrangements through our planned care steering group that we have in place. We have got a process in place that general practice can refer direct to X-ray, therefore mitigating the need for a secondary care referral step process, which basically saves another step in that overall process. Active clinical triage in terms of referrals coming in is done and monitored through planned care steering group as well, together with where appropriate virtual consultations are undertaken as appropriate per person, and also those patient initiated returns, so we're not just bringing people back unduly on a regular basis. So again, that one is for closure.
So are we happy that all the referrals are appropriate, that we're monitoring, managing that? Yeah.
We do our best in terms of, if we have clinical guidelines through our ref help, it's called. Got a GP who's the clinical lead for that, and that essentially is about standardising our clinical guidelines to ensure that they are being adhered to and received in secondary care. Then consultation on said guidelines is done, and then if they're not appropriate, that's an active clinical triage and we would refer back.
Right. Okay. So we've got a
There
system
is a
for
system in
identifying it.
place, absolutely.
Any comments, questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, future priorities. This was essentially one to send out 3 new directions, which never actually happened. So really this is about closing this one down. That was hospital flow, modernising outpatients and care and support at home. So it's not been achieved. Hospital flow is obviously happening, modernising outpatients is happening, and care and support, I hope we have a direction out on that one as well. So there's probably something in the whole, looking at it at our session on the 17th, 14th, should I say, of January, in terms of our future direction. But that one is for closure.
So, and I know we had the conversation at committee, but just for voicing at this board, do we understand why the directions were never issued?
I don't understand that at this point, 'cause I wasn't involved in chair, so I can look into that.
No, I think what we need to do is make sure we've got systems in
Due
place now
process,
that
absolutely.
this is, you know, we can't repeat this, because clearly back in 2021 we identified that there was a need where we put a direct, or we should have put directions at, and it's just a gap in our processes.
Yeah.
So, any comments, anyone? Thoughts? No? Okay, thank you.
And I think just to come back on that, our processes and our directions policy and procedure that we've got in place mitigates that from happening in the future as well.
Super. Thanks.
So the last two essentially are, one, the maternity consultation, which has taken place, and we've essentially made that decision on that option one on maternity. So that direction's been sent out, so that supersedes this direction. And similar to the right care, right place options appraisal, all 4 directions have been sent to NHS Dumfries and Galloway as well. So it supersedes that.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that is my update. Thank you.
Any questions for Kirsty? Ian?
Just a reiterate. Page 13 for what I can see on the iPad. It's, IGBD 2004. It's the implementation of the physical integration development plan for palliative care. And it's what happens with that is what I'm trying to understand from the integration. So the Scottish Government has issued a new strategy. Palliative care matters from 2025 to 2030. Palliative care steering group has been established to follow the development of where we are local against strategy and develop an associated plan which will therefore supersede the direction. So again, so it's been superseded. So what does that say? We have to reach.
So I want to bring that one specifically into the finance, quality and performance in terms of an update on that, because we've had that strategy in place locally. We've had steering group for palliative care in place, and now we've got another new strategy issued, and essentially it really should come through strategic committee. So we're having that fuller discussion, and similar to strategic planning group as well. So we're doing that consultation piece to do that gap analysis of where are we against that new release strategy. So that's essentially the plan to do that.
So I suppose if that's the case, then so yeah, if a work undertaken at the committee level, will have to come back to be revisited, redirected,
Yes.
potentially to integration.
So the monitoring of that would then be, so something new comes in through our strategic committee, then our monitoring and management of that direction would be through our finance, performance and quality. And again, that assurance brought up to this space.
So like I said, item number 5, we cover that with
Indeed.
the recommendation to change that.
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
And
Sorry, Val.
it was just to say that the statutory guidance and the directions is actually really quite helpful and kind of eye-opening in terms of what directions actually really need to look at. And I just looked at the date and I was like, well, why did I never see this? Oh, it was January 2020. That's so, you know, so things do get this was really directive guidance that, you know, now through all the work that Kirsty's doing, we're actually following what it should be. But it was quite an interesting read, Kirsty, in terms of actually how specific and you know they actually need to be. So it's really helpful to see that.
We can just look at page 19. We've got one there that's ongoing, but slippage. So we can just understand that. It's the third sector contracts, which I know we've done. We spent a lot of time and we've had a lot of conversation through the committee. If we could just, because we're moving to the 3-year. David?
So the reason we've got slippage is the experience of the year 1 situation, where we recognise the need to build in an appropriate period post-tender and post-contract award to allow subsector providers to prepare for whether it goes deeper on the new contract or the big contract coming to an end. That's the reason we've got a bit of slippage in around that, but we will continue to progress that on a regular basis. There'll be an update comes forward.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm very comfortable because, as I say, as I mentioned in my update, we do go through those in the committee, and,
Yeah.
and I'm very pleased with the work that Peggy's doing in relation to that, and,
Yeah.
and I'm quite comfortable with it. So it's just really to voice that in the board so that everyone gets the opportunity to sort of hear it. Okay, as we're okay with that, everyone. Okay, moving on then. Item 7, thanks for that, Kirsty. Best value statement in draft risk strategy, management strategy, and I think it's you again, isn't it?
It is, yes. For my sins, but this has done the rounds, and we have done this in detail in terms of having this through the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee, where our external auditors are present. So they were content with the best value statement that you see in front of you. This is what we have governance-wise that we need to do on an annual basis and reflect those governance processes that we have in place. Secondly, the larger one is that we have got a statutory obligation to have our a risk management strategy. We have had that through the committee twice, and also had a workshop with everybody around the table in the IJB. So essentially, that is meeting our governance requirements. What we do need to start to do within our audit, risk and governance is monitor and manage our extant risks that we have in place, and actually think about what our future aspects may look like risk-wise as well, Chair. So essentially, it's to approve those 2 papers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions, anyone? It's going to be a quick meeting today. Although we started with an overrunning period. For me, there's a couple of things I'd like to say on page 5. Do you consider sufficient buy-in to the IGB's long-term vision for partners, officers and members? And I just think that the response is very anecdotal. I think that what we need to do is perhaps highlight what those are, and maybe even give some examples.
Yeah.
And I do think, as I was reading through it, there's clear areas where we've got quite a bit of evidence, and those are well populated. And then you can look at the ones that are not so well populated and think, well, perhaps there's a bit of work to be done there. And there's a typo on page 6 as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. But I do think, I think, for example, if you look at number 7, the response is very succinct, and I think it's because we probably need to do a little bit more work. And if you need some support in pulling that together, then we need to flag that up and do that.
And all I was going to say is we'll need to refresh it for 24-25 anyway.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, it would be really good to get input from all IJB members in terms of their thoughts around how we're evidencing that, because it can't just be left to Kirsty and alone around some of that. So I think we maybe just we could refresh that draft.
Is it perhaps? Sorry, is it perhaps something we should have as a standing agenda item on the committees then?
Yeah.
So that each of the committees has a look at that, and then we could feed in that way.
Very helpful.
And it will save any work away from that sort of context. Yeah.
No, thanks very much.
Okay. Anyone else? Thanks for that, Kate. Okay. Finish with item 7. Okay. Coffee. Item 8, financial performance update. We've got Katie here.
So I'll provide you with an update. The paper that you've got in front of you is based on the Q2 financial position. Obviously, we're nearly at the end of December, so we're in the process of refreshing for Q3 at the moment. I suppose the headlines from me is our in-year gap is increasing from 20 million to 21 million, and that's primarily due to external factors, specifically reductions in allocation from Scottish Government. And just to see, with my kind of NHS hat on, we are actively having conversations around how we mitigate that, and that may come back as we have those conversations. I think the other thing just to kind of highlight is the increased risk in the financial position from the report that I reported at Q1. Now, we knew that there was additional kind of financial implications of various things, including things like the National Flexible Framework and the like, but we have seen, I suppose, an overall kind of worsening of the position, and I suppose specifically within the delegated social work side of things. Just, I suppose, a couple of things. The pay awards for 24-25 are now resolved. So in terms of the funding mechanisms and everything for that, so I've got no specific issue. In terms of the NHS delegated budget, we're looking at an overspend currently at 15.5 million year to date. So that's based on the position at month 6. Specific risk around GP prescribing that I know we've kind of talked about. However, savings, although we've got a gap in the position reported, savings are on track overall to deliver. And the piece of work that we're undertaking are reviewing a number of the significant kind of cost pressures that we have across the system. And that work is happening through November, December and into kind of January. I think the other thing just to reflect in terms of the council delegated budget, the 3.8 million overspend forecast as part of the Q2 position, that's a worsening of about 2 million from Q1. We have got a number of kind of commitments that we know we've made, things like the right care, right place, discharge to assess, and a range of known pressures that probably account for that. We do also have unallocated reserves of about 4.4 million, and we know that we're going to have to basically tip out all of those reserves to kind of get us to anywhere near a kind of a balanced position, and the team are working with the appropriate general managers to see how we can improve on that from the year end. The other thing that I thought I would just update on, if you're happy with me doing this, Chair, is the budget that was announced on the 4th of December and the implications of that.
I'll take any questions on what you've said up to this point, and then we can move on to that. If anyone has anything. Must have been nearly Christmas. Clearly, we've got an unsustainable position where we've got 4.4 million of reserves that we're going to utilise. Once it's gone, it's gone. So really, the difficulty, I suppose, is planning, so that we don't find ourselves in that situation. But I don't see how we do that. But
yeah, and I mean, remember as well, we have delivered a level of savings. I think about 2 million, just over 2 million savings in year. I think when we start to talk about the potential position for 25-26, that's where the numbers start to get really scary, shall we say, in terms of what they potentially look like. And I suppose in reality, we've known this is coming. It's not that this should have kind of any great surprise. I think the backdrop of a lot of the additional resource that we've received, has gone into paying higher rates for care staff and our staff as a result of that, but we haven't had any additional resource to support activity and any of those kind of increases. So it's no doubt it's an incredibly challenging position.
Okay. Melanie?
I suppose just reflecting on that and thinking about the Chief Social Work Officer report, which talks about huge increases in demand, huge service pressures. We know our demographics for the next, 10 years, certainly, in terms of going to be real pressure on it. And so I suppose it does connect to that direction that has been issued to the local authority, isn't it, in terms of how we can actually deliver what we need to deliver within what feels a very challenging budget position, because it does sit around health and social care leadership team table feel that budget is not enough actually for what we need to do going forward. Even if we innovate hugely over the next period. So I'm just seeing other people begin to just get confirmation that I've understood that correctly.
Yeah, and there is a piece of work that Nicole, as interim chief officer, has commissioned, which is starting to look at that visioning piece and that longer term kind of reality around where we're at, because as you say, it's just not a sustainable position, Valerie, and the only way we can meet the kind of budget requirements moving into next year is to actually cut the amount of care that we deliver. That's the reality. That's the only place that we've got to go. So we're going to be having to have some of those really challenging kind of conversations. We have had some conversations about how we play into the local authority budget process, and we will be putting a submission in through that, wherever that lands, partly as well from my perspective to make sure that that ownership of the issue is shared with the local authority as well and doesn't just sit around this table.
Thanks. I guess some reflections on that and more to your point here about moving into future use and understanding the system, how scary it looks. I suppose I'm just reflective of conversations that Nicole and I have had across this year, and the latest data that's out about our third sector in Dumfries and Galloway, for example, shows that particularly around health and social care and some of that early work, there's kind of £33 million of non-statutory monies in that sector. And there's a real honest question about not ever that the IGB or public services should be directing how that's used, but how do we consider what's already happening in our communities and drive some budget to invest in what's working rather than looking to replicate it? So there's a lot of preventative work with some additional top-up investment could increase its reach, rather than what we're doing at the moment in some of the areas that Nicole and I have talked about, is we actually have a replication, be great third sector community-based work, and then we've got an NHS service doing the same thing. So very open to have the conversation, but I think it's just, that's a very practical, honest conversation that's to be had about how we maximise that. And I know there's interest in the third sector as well around helpful in terms of demonstrating the sector's impact on communities to align to some of our Dumfries and Galloway priorities. We're all intended to do the same thing. So very clear that under no circumstances should that be directed, that investment be directed by public services. But I think there's a genuine interest in third sector organisations to say, actually, how do we maximise the best of resources? And in reality, sometimes those services or models of support locally are restricted or moved out of the way because we've got some kind of statutory or public service involvement there, when in fact we could be doing much better together in that early planning. So more of an observation there on the latest information. I think that's for the sector as a whole. In terms of its subcategorised, the sector as a whole, the latest data shows is £171 million in our DG third sector last year. If you look at the commissions and contracts to third sector, actually the associate partnership played a very small proportion of that, and the sector is able to generate that income and investment into the sector. And I just think there's an honest conversation about how do we start. It's not going to happen overnight, and it certainly won't happen for next year's budget, but there's an opportunity almost there, I think.
Can I comment on that? I think it has been a theme when we've discussed it around this table, even as long as I've been sitting around the board. And I think that for me, the reality is how do we do that? You know, how do we make that shift, and how do we, you know, does it require disinvestment to do reinvestment? How do we change our models? And I think part of that longer term visioning stuff, and I suppose when I'm talking longer term, I'm not talking long term, I'm talking the next 5 years sort of time frame. How do we actually sort of shift that model so that we can support that? And it will mean that we'll have to change, particularly the way that we do things, particularly kind of professional practice around things. So, and it is really challenging, because otherwise we would have done it to date.
Absolutely. No, I agree exactly what you're saying. I think we need to be very careful of public sector involvement with the funding that goes to third sector, because over involvement could lead to some of the funding disappearing, because it's perhaps not been seen as being delivered to for the purpose it's been intended. I think we also have an issue whereby we need to see what's there and work more collaboratively with the third sector, because it means I've tried to deliver some of those things. And conversation Nicole and I were having earlier was just about that. Was it the aids, the provision of aids and such like, what they're called? You know, the care and repair and the sort of maintenance, and the fact that, you know, if you invest £100, you know, you could prevent somebody ending up as in hospital, in all the associated costs that go with that. So I think that there's a great deal of work to be done. And I think that we need to perhaps be looking at some of those approaches and how we get it. And we see through the third contract monitoring the benefits that there are to be had, but I think we also see the vulnerabilities that's there within some of the groups within the third sector. Rebecca, sorry, do you want to come in on that?
No, I'll come in. after
Rebecca,
David.
then David.
Thanks. I just wanted to add to that, but absolutely, I think we were in the early days of integration, the challenges that we had in terms of working with third sector, because we started out really well. We started out with a lot of ambition. However, that fell aside because of GPDR and various other things. So that I think we now need to tackle the barriers head on. Because if we don't, we're just going to find ourselves back in this place again. So I think we do need to work hand in glove with the third sector. We need to disinvest in some things to invest in prevention, because actually we find ourselves at the back end of trying to sort things. So we're constantly in crisis management, constantly. So we need to kind of pull back from that and invest in early intervention. I think it's the only way that we're going to see change.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David?
Yeah, I think really helpful and really interesting conversation, and Valerie, I think brilliant to put that question on the table. Wholeheartedly agree with what Alan has said. For us to achieve that, for us to support through additional funding for third sector, and for third sector to step into that space more fully, it requires a change. It requires a change in culture. It requires a change in expectation. It requires a change in attitude. And it goes to the heart of the agreed model of care that this IJB agreed to almost 3 years ago now, about putting the person at the centre, about looking first at their strengths and their resources, and then looking at the community support around them. And we need to practice that model of care, and we need to be supporting people to see that as the norm, that we will connect you with those services within your community in the first instance. And if there are gaps between the outcomes that you have specified that you want to achieve and what those community-based services can support you to achieve, then that's where the public sector needs to step in, and we need to change that whole mindset. And that goes to the heart of the social care vision piece that Nicole and Stephen alluded on for us. And I think we need to see that absolutely not just come forward next year, but actually begin to change our practice and begin to change the conversations we have with local people as a result of that as well next year. Or else we'll run into exactly the problems that Valerie is describing for us.
Okay, thanks. Nicole?
Yeah, again, just taking that opportunity to remind members that direction is going to come round for approval, which is to approve that work around about the visioning for adult social care. Because I think for me, Valerie, and also Alan, that we've set up, or we're about to set up, a steering group once we've got that direction kind of kicked off in terms of where we're at, and we'll have strong professional leadership from social work through Rebecca, planning support, operational management support, and also having third sector as part of that, and in at the beginning for that visioning. Now that visioning is going to be a 1 to 10 year plan in terms of what things look like, because sustainability isn't just about the financial sustainability, there is also the risk that our whole model for that adult social care from a statutory point of view is in and around the independent sector, and we need a bit of variability in that in terms of how we make sure that the model is sustainable. It needs to be that strengths-based approach that David was kind of highlighting there in terms of the model of care, and we need to move to that, and our third sector colleagues are key to that, and it is about not trying to replicate what is already being done well. But I think the biggest message for me is about innovation. We're already delivering 47,000 hours of statutory care across the service. We're not going to be able to recruit more to that, not because money and what we pay people, etc., is a factor. But if you just look at the working age population versus the non-working age population for the next 10 years, it just doesn't stack up. So we need to innovate, we need to use our partners that are our joint partners, and we need to get back to that kind of shared approach. And technology needs to absolutely be at the heart of what we do to innovate, because we will need to change how we deliver services. So I think it's really key, because this IJB board is going to be at the heart of pushing and championing that, across the whole sector, and some of that will be financial, Katie, in terms of how we evidence that efficiency from a financial point of view. Probably even more importantly, it's how we continue to support people's assessed needs and how we continue to support people in that early intervention and prevention. And the last thing I wanted to say, Chair, is actually our last Health and Social Care leadership team, much to Valerie's delight, we actually did make a very bold decision where we decided to disinvest in some traditional roles that we have had within the Health and Social Care Partnership for a number of years, to reinvest in what is innovation, early intervention and prevention, and absolutely that health and wellbeing approach. So it's starting to feel as if we're starting to get to that place, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that those bold decisions are being taken to disinvest, to reinvest in roles that are actually different to what we traditionally delivered across the Health and Social Care Partnership, and that is joint working between the NHS and the local authority in terms of some of that work, along with the third sector. So I just wanted to highlight that it's starting to feel real in terms of that, the change, and is actually being brave enough to make some of these different decisions.
No, thanks, Nicole. I think, you know, the key thing in there is if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting the same result. And clearly that's not working. So we do have to start, if you like, disinvesting to reinvest. So, Alan, you want to?
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, just reflection on some of the comments if I can. I think to David's point as well around the understanding of what's happening in communities is the starting point and not the end. I guess that's my point. Now, I'm also very conscious that the third sector, in terms of how it's organised and how it needs to respond, is hugely important, because there's a certain understanding or misunderstanding around the risk that's involved in lots of individual organisations. So we are already working on with our sector on new models. So I think it's for everyone to take a different look about what we're doing, and absolutely just to reiterate the point, not about public services directing third sector responses. There's lots of organisations who want to be connected and involved. They're doing their thing and doing really well, but there is significant hundreds upon hundreds of organisations who are actually really keen to be involved, because it's about the responsiveness and the integration of how we're all working across our community. So it's a kind of recognition that we all need to be different, but we're trying our best to move third sector and the perspective of third sector out of that space in the deficit space. Public services first, and third sector will pick up the balance, and actually we should be having the conversation in reverse. What's already there and working well with a smaller amount of public service investment might maximise the use of that and avoid the need for public services to be in all of those spaces, for example. So very open to have the conversation, and I guess there's a bit of a challenge there as well about being bold, and it's really difficult to do. Slightly easier if you're managing your way through the process rather than finding yourself driven into the process, which I think in some of the financial situation we are where we are. But the idea of being brave and doing something different is great. The one thing I would say is the sector lacks the capacity building to do that, because there are lots of very small organisations in their communities doing nothing. They don't have additional capacity. So finding ways for us to work together in some of that capacity building that then realises that 5 to 10 year benefit, I think is a more difficult conversation that needs to be had. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Kirsty, did you want to come in? No. Okay.
Okay.
Linda?
Thanks, Chair. This, I think the conversations about innovation and creativity, working with our sector are absolutely heartening and great. But what you're saying in those 1 to 10 years, what we've got is a financial report that says we do something now. And I think that's the challenge. I think I'm absolutely, it's fantastic having conversations about where we're going and just invest to reinvest, which seems to be the that's great. It's a cultural shift that needs to happen, and these things take time in the area to do. Fantastic, it's happening. What we've got is a harsh reality in terms of finance that we're not actually managing at the moment. And I think we haven't discussed that. We discussed what we're going to do in the future, but we have to gap and get revision. You've highlighted points to that should be concerning us. What we're saying is where we're going, which is fantastic, what we're doing. What we're not looking at the moment, Chair, is what we're doing without that. And that is the harsh reality I think we are as a region, and I think other regions as well. But I think that's something that needs to be addressed as an emergency. People are going without care at the moment because of gaps in service provision. It's nobody's fault. It's not an issue. It's not nobody's trying to be hard. The third sector, public sector, health service, council are all working really, really hard, primary care working really hard, everybody's working really hard to do something, but we're not managing it, and we've not actually discussed that in terms of the financial provision. I think where we're going and what we're talking about, where we want to go is absolutely essential, and that's part of forward planning. But what we have is a gap in service provision. And that's the horrible harsh reality of where we are at the moment, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. I think we need to look at that and say, where are we going with that? What do we do in terms of that, as opposed to where are we going in the next 5 to 10? It's fantastic reasons for that, which is cultural shift. But actually, the harsh reality is we're not providing what we need to provide for people. It's about people. We're not doing that.
Agree completely. And I find it interesting that, we're talking finance here, and we've walked around to what our job is about, which is about providing care and support for the people within our communities. And ultimately, that's what we're here about, that's what we're about. But we need the finance in order to be able to do it. And if we don't have the finance, we have to look at how do we restructure, how do we look at alternative ways of doing it. But you're right, we have to do it quick. We can't sort of say that 5 years from now, this is where we want to be and do nothing until we get there. We need to be looking at how do we do it now. And I think things like right care, right place are a step in that direction. I think the decisions we've been making over the last few months are steps towards that. But even just to get to that seems to have been quite an arduous journey, and nothing seems to move at any pace, because we obviously need to do our due diligence. We have to make sure we have the support, the structures, the finance in place. So I think it's really important. And I think you're right, we do need to be doing it now, but how we do that, I don't know if anybody's got that light bulb moment that's going to come out. Ian's got it. David has. David has.
No, David doesn't. I think it's a really, really good challenge on that. I absolutely do. And I think the IJB today might want to reflect on how it takes assurance around that challenge. I'm conscious we've got a finance, performance and quality committee at the start of the new year. And perhaps one of the things that we could do is to ask for a report to that committee from the planned care steering group and the unscheduled care steering group on the health side, to understand the work that is being done to meet that unmet demand that you're describing. I think particularly in the planned care side, we're seeing our waiting list growing. And equally, I think perhaps ask from social work, especially, but perhaps ask from social work for details of what is happening or what could happen in the short term to undertake review assessments of people who are on service and those who are waiting for service, to understand how we might allocate that precious scarce resource that we have across those individuals in a more equitable way to mitigate the risk of people being without service just now. So I don't know, that's just a suggestion for me, and I think it's going to go as chief officer to decide whether that's properly or not, and perhaps recommended to the IJB.
I mean, I think for me, whilst we talk about a 1 to 10 year plan for that vision and work, there will need to be things that will need to be delivered next year in terms of the cost pressures. And looking at Viv, who's just joined us to talk about the carer strategy, David and I were reflecting, that slogan, more of the same won't do, probably applies to all of our services in terms of where we need to get to. So I think as part of that visioning work, there is a lot of learning from other partnerships. Again, East Renfrewshire working with third sector to review all provision of care to see, where is there duplication, where could we be looking differently. So I think that work will be picked up through the visioning work anyway, David, as opposed to setting something else up to look specifically at the adult social care space, thinking that Rebecca has stepped out at the moment. But we do need to do some things differently now, Linda. And some of that, there will be the reality that we will need to make some really difficult decisions in terms of what that means from a planned care point of view. And again, Katie, you might want to come in and update. What we're needing to work out is what the recent announcement from Scottish Government in terms of the financial investment in planned care looks like, and what that might mean for us in Dumfries and Galloway. Because again, that has been highlighted as one of the Scottish Government's priorities. Unless you tell me differently, Katie, I don't think we've quite got the detail in terms of that work through, in terms of what that might mean. So I think therefore the January committee might be difficult for us to really bring that forward. But I do want to just give that assurance that through some of the financial plans, we have got a lot of work happened this year, and we'll see that in the paper, both from a health point of view and a local authority point of view, about the savings agenda, but it's going to be even more challenging next year. And I think across the piece, both on a health and a local authority point of view, if we hadn't delivered the savings or the efficiencies that we have delivered, we would be in a far more challenging position. That's how we make the plans now for next year in terms of what that looks like. And again, we'll be bringing those through that financial performance and quality committee back into the IGB in terms of what are the financial plans for the savings plans for next year.
Could you allow me then, Chair, just to give a bit of an update on position, because I think it's really important that that people understand where we are at the moment based on. Are you happy if I do that?
I think Ken wanted to come in just before that. Sorry, I thought so you had.
No, I did. Yeah, no, and it was my reflection on all this was so like Place and maternity took big bits of work recently, which were really fantastic pieces of work. Both took about 2 years to build, and we don't have 2 years, and we need to engage with our public about how all these services, most of your health and social care stuff, need to change, and it's really hard to do that without that engagement, knowledge, understanding. I guess it's how we do it. It's under 2 years to do that in the depth that I know that the teams did around those 2 projects. But it's a really challenging bit of public comms, I guess. So I think there will be some understanding. I don't think any understanding to the level of what actually fundamentally has to happen here.
Okay, Katie.
Yeah, I suppose a bit for me, we've known that the financial position has evolved. We've known that for as long as I've been at this table. So, I think where we're at though, for me, is definitely a bit of a tipping point, because we're at a position where we absolutely will overspend next year if we don't do anything different, and we know that goes against the statutory kind of requirements of both the local authority and the NHS board. So from my perspective, where we're at the moment, I'm working with both colleagues in NHS and local authority to refresh our financial plans for that next kind of 3-year period, based on the fact that we got the detail around we got some information around the budget position on the 4th of December when that was announced in Parliament. So we've got that. I've got a letter in front of me, which is the letter that came out through the NHS. There's a similar letter through local authority, and I'm quite happy to share that after the event if people would find that useful. I think in terms of the NHS, the headlines for me are the 3% uplift to the NHS budget, which they believe will cover pay uplifts and will give some support to non-pay costs, but we know that drugs and other kind of costs are far exceeding that, and it's unlikely that our deficit position will stand still. It will increase proportionately for the pressures that we're seeing in that space. There was some funding confirmed for the Agenda for Change non-pay elements, albeit it's less than what they've given us this year, 150 million as opposed to 200 million last year. But as Nicole's alluded to, there was a line in the budget, and it's probably the headline that everybody's seen, which is 200 million investment. And we believe that will support things like the planned care stuff that Nicole was talking about, frailty, some of the GMS and general practice kind of initiatives, potentially dental workforce, but the detail around how that will be allocated and the basis of how boards will receive that is still to be kind of worked through, and certainly I definitely don't envisage we'll have that for the first week in January. I think it will be no doubt a series of announcements over the next wee while, albeit there have been conversations already about the kind of the planned care piece in particular. Good thing within that though is it does talk about that the NHS board must pass over 3%, that 3% to integration authorities. Now that is no different to what we've done since we've been in place. So again, but it gives us a bit of assurance in terms of that. And the other interesting thing in terms of the NHS is from 25-26 You've heard me talk about the concept of brokerage, so where there's a deficit position within NHS boards and they receive brokerage to balance books, that will no longer be available. So from next year, if NHS boards can't break even, that will be an overspend. The implication of that for the board would be potentially the qualification of accounts and also Section 22 reports and a review of the escalation kind of status. And we've had some discussion around the NHS board table just actually yesterday around that requirement to have a 3-year plan and setting out a sort of a savings programme tied around something that they've described as the 15-box grid, which is an assessment of opportunities, looking at productivity and efficiency savings, and also value-based health and care and some of the work around that. And we've got, within the NHS board, we've got a financial recovery programme that's sort of based around that. And in terms of any kind of policy funding, we think it will still be quite tightly directed around specific things, as I alluded to. In terms of health and social care, there's 140 million coming to local government, and of which 125 million of that is to lift the wage for adult social care workers to £12.60 an hour, in line with the real living wage. 10 million to uplift free personal care rates, and then further 5 million to support the commitment to provide additional voluntary sector short breaks for unpaid carers. The confirmation that that funding should be additional, not substitutional, to each local authority's recurring budgets. And again, just to give you an idea of the scale of what we're talking about here. So although we're talking about uplifts that will align to that living wage, there's nothing in that for any other inflationary or other pressures. So immediately you've got a kind of a gap in, the sums don't add up. You immediately got a kind of a gap in position. The other element of this, which is quite concerning for me, is the funding for national insurance. So you're aware that with the changes around national insurance rates in the UK government, that there is a level of funding coming across from Treasury to Scotland to support that. We know at this stage that funding is not sufficient to deal with the costs associated with that, and specifically my understanding is the funding model is based on staff who are either employed through the NHS or the local authority. So where parts of the sector, such as primary care contractors or kind of care at home providers or care homes, where they are not on our books as employees, there is no funding in the model currently for that, and we know that there's been sort of pleas made to government around that. So that's the one that I'm keeping a very close eye on, because again the scale of what that could mean for us is millions. It really is quite significant in terms of our position. So I suppose a couple of things for me around this. I'm working with the teams to kind of get some more accurate numbers, but I did meet with local authority finance teams last week, and the scale of what we're looking at in terms of the adult social care budget could be up to sort of 14 million is the sort of numbers that we're talking about. And I wanted you to be cited on the kind of gap that we're looking at in terms of that financial position is far greater than what we've seen before. In terms of the NHS, I'm not sure, but again, it will be larger than where we've been before. So from my perspective, working with as I say, both NHS colleagues on the financial recovery plan, that side of things. Nicole and I have met with teams within her general managers and social work to kind of get together kind of plans for the adult social care budget, but it's going to take us a bit of time to kind of work that through. I had proposed that we have a kind of a workshop session. I can't remember if we've got a date for that yet, Amber, but sort of certainly maybe towards the end of January, beginning of February, to kind of look at where we're at and to kind of get, and we'll have By then, I will have some more robust numbers around the position. We will be, as part of that process, putting a position into the council budget setting process. And we will also be working up those savings plans in more detail, so we've got an idea of the kind of things that we might be looking at. And I have to say, and I'm aware this is a public meeting, we will be looking at very challenging stuff in terms of what we can and can't do. And I suppose I welcome Linda's challenge around that. This isn't the 5-year position we're looking at. This is the here and now in terms of where we're going to be around the budget for the beginning of next year. And I have to say, at this stage, I'm not sure how we square the circle around this in terms of how we get to a budget position that I'm going to be able to bring forward for sign off. And I suppose I'm just being open, honest and transparent with you around that at this stage. So I suppose my ask, Chair, is what else do you want to see as part of that process, and what we'll work out what else we can bring forward, and just also I'm assuming if we do have some sort of workshop around the financial position, we would invite all IGB members, not just the kind of finance performance and quality committee members. So yeah, I'll stop talking there.
Thoughts, comments? Black hankies?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I was going to ask about if by the way of a fourth recommendation, I wasn't actually, I didn't want to say too much just now, but I think it's about more the money. Hearing about this, and it's COVID master, where that kind of covered it, slowed it up. This was covered a few years ago, and it's delayed it in real terms. I think we need a conversation. I was going to ask you to organise it, a discussion with the board members in particular in the early part of January. Even though it's the middle of January, with the chief officer, the Section 95 officer, and the board members to discuss to try and get handle on what's really happening here. And the type of decisions we're going to make, we need some kind of discussion around about that as the decision maker. So we do, it's a workshop, totally agree with the workshop with Katie proposing that, that's right, so the wider everybody needs to sit at the table. But from my perspective, I do need to understand before we get to that workshop what is really going to happen here going into the budget set. I think the council will stand up and address, because they've got the different mechanisms, they've got different mechanisms in regards to allocating funds for NHS. It's got to be difficult for NHS. There will be compromise. So what service do they stop delivering if that's the case? Where does the integration joint for how can what kind of decisions? He's sitting in the back of my mind for 4 years now, waiting on this coming. He's coming, but that's I think we're at the point now. I think it's going to feel like being on a check. Because it's a tough decision, but not that didn't have any means.
So
if you didn't mind the fourth recommendation, we call it almost like an emergency summit amongst the board members, the chief officer and our Section 95 officer to discuss what the through early Jan.
You said that to me,
It's not to yourself, no.
Right, yeah.
You through yourself if you're up for that, Chair.
No, I'm just thinking what information it is that we want that we've not got already, because in order to try and navigate a way forward, I think it's really important with the key officers there to tell us what the options are and what the likelihood of success is. And I think that we can have that meeting and we can get a better perspective, perhaps more in-depth perspective in relation to the finances and how rocky that road ahead looks. But without those key officers, we don't know what we're navigating or how to navigate it.
So I agree with what you're saying, but I think that's definitely the workshop.
Yeah.
At that point,
Yeah.
it's just almost like a pre-meeting for the board members.
Yeah.
I would like to really hear what I'm really thinking, but I do want to hear.
I think anything that enhances our understanding is to be engaged as welcome as possible. But again, we'll go back to that capacity issue and such like. But certainly, if we can get something arranged for probably the third week in January or something like that, and then look at some sort of workshop in February. Well,
I just want to clarify what I'm not quite sure what you're saying within that. Who do you want on the table, Ian, and what's the? I agree that we should be having the conversation to say where is it that we go with this and what are our options, and I'm quite happy to have those conversations, but I don't know I'm just also thoughtful about what stage we'll be at in that process, and we might not have all of those kind of options. And I suppose that if I'm being honest, I don't know how we're going to get to a plan that has a zero bottom line in 1 year. I genuinely don't know how we're going to do that.
I don't think it's achievable.
No,
Just a quick comment, so even I'm going to put this in context, so I'll quote Willem, when our previous going says, the understanding was that if every school leaving Dumfries and Galloway left went in the healthcare sector, it's still enough people. So it's not just about money.
oh yeah,
So you understand I'm coming from, that type of discussion, it's not just about engaging with the third sector and trying to get better value for money. It is about cutting services. And I will have that offline discussion with ourselves to say, right, okay, if we are, for me, it needs to be demonstrated, whatever services we're going to take, it needs to be demonstrated to me what impact they're having on the service user. So we'll have it, and I will have that offline discussion before we get into a proper workshop with actually a proposal will probably start to come forward, and that will help formulate a report coming forward in regards to service change, cuts, transformation, so on and so forth. That's why I'm asking for that. If possible, I mean, if it's declined, I'll accept that too, but I think that's what I really want to get into that discussion where we can open up the way we have a feel.
I'm loath to not, because like I say, it enhances our understanding, can only help us make better decisions. So I think that there's that, but I think we need to understand what it is that we're doing. And I think I'm a bit like you, Katie, I can't quite get my head clear.
So in my head, I don't see a workshop as being any different to that. I think we need to get in a room and thrash out what our options are, whatever they are. Put all the, I don't know, but really challenging and difficult options on the table, and just have that honest debate about where we go with that. And I think we do need to do that as a collective IJB. I think we all need to be around the table to have that. I think separately how we manage the challenge within the local authority side of things, and that I'm happy to have that sort of offline conversation. And I think if people have got ideas or thoughts or views on where we're going to take this, really welcome to hear that. But I do think we need to be, kind of structuring that conversation well.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mark first.
Thanks, Chair. So I think for me, the important point there is when you think about things like the subcommittees, that discussion needs to take place so the subcommittees have got an understanding of what the risk appetite is around some of the work that they've been asked to look at, especially specifically around that transformation innovative and future space, about what is the art of possible, what can we deliver and what shouldn't we be looking at, going forward, so that we've got a really sensible agenda sit within those subcommittees that is aligned with the financial picture.
Nicole, then David.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I mean, I think a workshop would be really helpful in terms of getting into the depth, the detail in terms of what we've got. We've got a piece of work that needs to be completed by the 14th of January, which is the budget process in the local authority, which is specifically for next year in terms of what those pressures are and what some of the potential solutions are. We do have an open door to the Scottish Government with no guarantee of additional funding, for us to take that compelling vision work through the Scottish Government in terms of being very clear about if we had X amount of investment, what would that mean? And if we didn't have investment, what would that mean? And particularly in that adult social care space, that from our professional chief social work officer, in terms of what that means, in terms of what level of care we are able to meet in terms of assess need and whether that's essential need only. So there are some really difficult decisions that potentially need to go onto the table so that we're very clear about the implications of not doing things. I think what Ken said is really important in terms of the time that it takes for us to make difficult decisions due to the processes that we absolutely need to go through. So there will be an element of work that needs to be done. I'm also thoughtful on Thursday that we do have a session with Health and Social Care leadership team operationally in terms of how did last year go and what is that operational view for some of the opportunities for next year, because again, it's our people on the ground that are going to have the best ideas potentially about what we can do differently. We will have some views as well, but I'm very clear that we need to feed information up in terms of how things look different. So again, we could build that and take that through Katie in terms of to that workshop, and that conversation needs to continue. Because if we had to do a service review in a certain area, that's probably a 2 to 3 year piece of work. So given where Katie has kind of highlighted where we're at, we do have real challenges going into next year, and that's where I have to have those discussions with the chief executives of both of the statutory organisations about what that means for us in terms of that delegated budget that we're working with within the IJB as well.
David?
Yeah, I think this is incredibly helpful. It gets to the crux of what the IJB is to be doing, and that is to prioritise its delegated budget to best meet the needs of local people. And I think the workshop idea is a brilliant idea, and I think you need that space to get into the detail of this. I think as well as looking at the financial picture for next year and beyond, you need to understand the impact of the changes in the modernisation work that's been happening this year and how that projected the impact going forward in terms of mitigating increasing demand, and to understand that gap is likely to be going forward, so you can then direct us to go away and do that work that Mark's suggesting around the further transformation that's required to reduce that demand further. But you need to understand the impact of what's happening here and now first in order to truly understand that now. So I think the workshop's the right space to get into to have that conversation.
Okay, Rebecca?
Yeah, I just agree, David. I think that's absolutely right. But I think also just for members to understand the huge decisions that are going to be faced, because actually within health, within social care, adult social care, we're already at the point where we're only delivering essential care. So we're not going to get to that place. We're way beyond that place. So I think it's about, and for me, you're then into your public protection arena where you've got adult support protection for people who are not going to be getting their needs met. So I think for me, we absolutely need to get to a point, and going back to Alan's chat earlier, that we're getting in there earlier, and we're preventing things from happening in the first place. From move forward. Thank you.
Can I come in?
Tracy, go on.
Thank you, Andy. I think despite your best efforts, we're not going to get there in terms of that. Balancing the books, and I think the consequences of stopping doing things have to be really well understood and well shared. It cannot be that the frontline people that are making these very difficult decisions on a day-to-day basis are carrying that. So we really need to think about how we're going to do it. And I welcome after the workshop, really well, we need to think about how then we share that in a way that people know that we have done it and we're doing it for the right reasons, but also we are supporting that decision making, because some of us are not going to be directly involved with the decision making, and it's the people at the front and everywhere that actually feel that unease, because the cultural change is needed and it's going to require some time, and it's happening, but also the expectations that we have about what is needed are very different. And this conversation has to be shared in public. And it's about this. We cannot continue doing what we're doing and what is that we're needing to change, but not only to save funding, but also because we are doing a lot of things that is not making any real difference to people. And are we using the resources, as we best can? We are not 100% sure, but there is a tension between wanting to balance, the funding with or the intentions around what we can do on being patient-centered. And it's very difficult at times to really be patient-centered when we don't have enough of the resources that we need. So either someone step up to that place and say, this is essential things that we're doing, because thinking about being more effective and innovative, and it's not going to be enough. So I really welcome the decision around the workshop, but I also welcome leadership around what is that we're going to do and be behind it. We talked about medicines and waste quite a lot,
And we haven't really, and the law was that, or what we can do as an IGB locally around some of the things that we could maybe influence. We're spending a lot of money, and rightly so, it's making a difference to many people in terms of that missing space, but also we know as prescribers that we need to do better, so we're working on that, but that's not going to be enough. So it has to be a variety of things, and nobody said it was going to be easy, like the song or something, but it's more about putting that plan that people can see why is that we're doing. It's not only about funding, it's also the real need for us to think. I was just reading a few days ago that we got one of the highest proportion of people living alone. So one household is one person. And we have one of the highest proportion in Scotland in that living alone piece. And we got rurality. So we got quite a few things that are against us. So we really need to think about that, and the things that you were saying, Alan, about the third sector. But we know where we're thriving, for example, migrant communities in this Ayrshire is because the community is there. But then right when they start doing it, then we cannot just be thinking, like you said, Linda, you know, but no amount of what we do is going to be in, no. But we need to think about our role as IGB members, and this conversation has to be at the front of it. I am happy to be quoted, you know, the press saying some of this. It's more about we need to change. So I could go on, but for me, yeah, the workshop is fine, but then what is next after that?
I think in amongst what you said there is it's a conversation we have to have with the public, and I do think it is, but I think that is something that needs to be managed very carefully. And we've seen with some of the recent decisions that we've taken that there are actors out there who will take whatever comments we make to meet their agenda, which won't necessarily be in the best interest of the public. And I believe that the decisions that we've taken have been the best interests of the public and their ability to be able to deliver those services. So I think it's very, very important that we get that messaging right. To touch on what Ken said already about the duration, the length of time it takes to get things done. You know, again, we have to be careful because we have the situation whereby we consult with people and then they say, you've already consulted, why are you back again? And I think, you know, because it's why don't you just make a decision? And then you make the decision, they don't like the decision, so that, you know, and there's all that pressure that builds up. And it's a very complex picture, clearly. There is no easy answer to it, which is why we tend to go around the circle. And I think it's very, very important that we all have that buy-in, that we do the workshop, that people come, and that we have joint ownership of it. You know, that we all go forward with it, and that we promote that message, and that we are consistent in how we do that to make sure that what we are putting out to the public, you know, is the views of us all, but it's based on evidence, it's based on ability to deliver. Yeah.
Just in the back of that, I think I absolutely agree. It comes back to that messaging and public engagement. But I suppose there's something that we need to start maybe against that more courageous with some spaces, because we're allowing a clear minority that's allowed to slow us down or stop us or direct travel. We know what the right direction is. The point that Kevin going back what Gracie was saying was just, yeah, you mentioned person-centred, and we know there's that kind of tripartite person-centred, safe, but there's a bit for me about safety is the bit that has to remain the priority, and sometimes the person-centred bit might slip a bit if you're just focusing, because we've got to be very something. If safety slips, then you're in trouble. There's a general healthcare need out there, and if we're not careful, teams will get siloed, start to shut the door and say, no, we're not going to do that. We don't think we need to deliver that. That somebody has to sort of just move somewhere else. And that's against the role for the IGB to have that overarching, make sure that we're not, I mean, I'm splashing and saying basically, because often it's primary care that ends up picking up the pieces, because the team in the hospital says, right, we're not delivering the thing, we're not going to start doing that. But somebody's got to see those patients. So we just need to keep that in mind, that it's a hideously complex system, and a small change here can have a big effect over here.
I'm cognizant of something that somebody said earlier, and I can't remember who it was, about the prevention. And I think prevention is the way, but it takes cultural change. It takes a lot. And I remember when I was a younger man, which was actually longer than it might, you might think. You know, there used to be a well-manned clinic at our local GP surgery, and that stopped. And I don't know why it stopped, but I never got to a point where I was subjected to it. And those are the sort of things where you get the prevention. You know, the fact that you have the bowel cancer screening at 50 in Scotland means that our bowel cancer rates are significantly better than perhaps the rest of the UK. But it's about how do we get that message out about people taking responsibility for their own health, and for us, how do we build systems that create support mechanisms that will mean that they will engage in preventative activities rather than, well, let's just wait till we get to crisis and then we try and address it. And obviously that's more expensive and more time consuming and makes great demands on us as a system. It's an uplifting conversation, isn't it? Linda, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think talking around the table, I think there is a genuine desire to change the culture. As we've said, that will take 5 to 10 years to do that or more, or it's an ongoing permanent thing that we need to do. There's a need to involve people more in terms of their responsibilities and their, you know, it seems to be a give and take, and it should be a give when it comes to NHS. I think for people, I'll get, it's like we need to give something back, we need to develop a degree of resilience. It's not everybody, but some people can develop a degree of resilience. Talk about medication. Do you know what medication? Not you, but you do. Some medication, perhaps not. Let's review that. Why, you know, and let's have those honest conversations and put it with strong messages. You know, this is sometimes tough times for opportunities for people to make really tough decisions, and this needs to be a time where I think my personal opinion is we have to make some really tough decisions for the next couple of years to get us through what's a really, really, really horrendous time. And it's tough to make decisions, but you need strong leadership to take this forward. You need to make these tough decisions to be able to get a bottom line to build on. And I think you said, you know, people have spoken about, I know I'm fairly new here, people have spoken about we need to do, I think we need to do now to make these tough decisions to enable us to move forward and have almost like twin tracks. How we deal with next year and the year after, which Katie, thank you, sound correct in terms of finance. That isn't, no, but we need to be honest about that. We need to actually recognise that can't just continue to go as we have been, but also to push for what you're talking about is the, you know, disinvest to reinvest model, what that looks like, and to look at prevention and resilience in the population. That's a different track, but there's two tracks here. One is that, and one is how do we deal with what's going to hit us in the face. Well, it has hit us in the face today in terms of financial report. And I think that needs to be done sooner rather than later. And there'll be decisions that the population won't like, but that's IV. It's always the case. We spoke about that. Ken, you know, you get a small minority shouting when you had. We get that all the time from local government. It shouldn't prevent you taking tough decisions. And that's the challenge that we have to do. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Anything else, Katie? No?
I've said enough.
Okay.
Can I ask, sorry, just as a
Yeah,
question,
of course you
Katie,
can.
on your
Of course you can.
real-time updates and maybe slightly different track, I agree with what Jim said, and I absolutely agree that both need to start. If you're looking at the long term and forgetting about it because it needs in the long term, you never get started. So we need to plan for now, a view for 5 years, what we want for 10, and start them all at the same time. It's entirely possible to do that if we're all maximising our resources to various extent. My point, I think, is back to the budget position. I know there's lots to be worked out. I'm curious in the conversation we're having now about the change that's needed. So we know from the budget proposal that there's 100 million of NHS reform monies, but when you look at the list of things, there's quite a long list of pre-programmed reform, if you like, that's all ready to come. And I know there's some public service reform money, community engagement money going into local authorities, 35 million, I think, there's a proposal. Again, how far is that going to get us? I was just curious about, is there any indication at the moment around how much of that 100 million for NHS particularly is likely to be invested or be able to be invested in local reform, given you're starting from a deficit position and a lot of the money's pre-programmed in? So I'm just looking for what is the gap, is there a space in there to invest and change?
I suppose there's a couple of things for me. One is none of what's in the budget impacts positively on our underlying deficit position from either NHS or local authority. That is still there, and so that doesn't, magically go. We might get non-recurring money to broker to the end of the year, but the underlying deficit position is still there. So that's there. I think in terms of the 200 million talked about, that will come with very specific kind of tags in terms of the kind of levels of investment. Some of it will hopefully help us manage some of the pressures in our system. So there's talk of how it might support some of the delayed discharge stuff and things like frailty at the front door and those sorts of things that may suit where we want to put investments at local level. But from my understanding, there will be that we won't have a pot that we will be able to go about. What I do think, though, we have had some tentative conversations with the local authority, specifically around if there are things that we can really evidence a spend to save around, then there might be some support around that. But remember, we're also coming with the massive challenge of what our deficit position looks like. There are things as well that I also think that we shouldn't roll over around. So I am supportive of us making whatever piece we need to make around the national insurance piece, because I think that would be disastrous for providers and contractors alike, because they will face those costs, and if there isn't funding to support that will make our position 10 times worse than where. So I think there are things that are within my kind of nuclear number, shall we say, that we shouldn't be just lying down and accepting, and I also think that we need to make sure that our partners, whether that's the NHS or the local authority, are fully engaged around this, understand the challenges, and that we're working in a collaborative way around that, and that there is recognition of where some of the challenges are and how we take things forward. And I think picking up what Linda was saying there, the bit about those tough decisions that we need to make, we need to all be thinking about what they are and start to put them on the table, because I don't have a memory bank of everything that I think is in that space, but I think we do need to be almost blue skying it in terms of where do we start with a clean sheet of paper a little bit.
Okay. Okay, at that point then, we've actually managed to catch back up with our time. Can I suggest that we break for lunch and